France to study certain aspects of perfume as it is as an artistic craft. And namely, what I focused on was how it manifests certain interesting types of abstraction. And to do this, I went to Paris and Grasse, and Grasse is sort of the traditional world perfumery town. It's near the Riviera in the south of France. So the best way to sort of locate this new phenomenon of artistic perfumery is to tell you about what perfumery used to be, which is entirely different. So perfumers used to be craftsmen, and because of this, perfumes were, we can say, representational, because they came directly from the plant. They recalled the plant when you smelled it. And the aim of the perfumer at the time also reflects the technology they had. They view distillation and making perfumes as taking the spirit of the flower from the body of the flower. And this is very metaphysical, and it reflects the philosophical views of this time, which were very dualist and about the opposition of body and spirit. And so because of this, many of the perfumes were representational, and they attempted to catch the scent of a single flower. So these were called soliflores, which means just one flower. So, and they would have names like, you know, Heaven's Rose or Night Jasmine. They'd be based on one flower. But perfumery today has been a move away from this. No longer do perfumers try to make something that's singular or representational. And this phenomenon can be traced to the invention of synthetic scent materials. So a little bit about synthetics. Basically, the loosest definition of a synthetic is something that has to be extracted from a plant using chemical processes and not physical processes, as opposed to naturals, which have to be taken with a physical process. Or it can be created in a lab. That's also considered a synthetic. So they have a range in where they come from, and also a range in which they are close to natural materials. So some are created in the lab just with chemical reactions, and some of them can actually be taken from a plant. So I have three here that sort of exemplify the range you can find. So geraniol is something that's found in roses and geraniums, but you can also meet it in a lab, and when you smell it, it smells almost exactly like a rose. Aldehydes are found in roses and citrus, but in very minute amounts, so they weren't really usable until they were synthesized. And when you smell them, they smell abstractly floral. It's kind of a weird sensation. And these last three are sort of a group, or it's like a sort of sampling from a different kind of synthetic, which is wholly created in a lab. They don't smell like anything you ever smell. They don't smell, they smell like they have a smell, but they don't smell like anything, which is a little bit paradoxical because usually when you smell something, it's the smell of. It's a scent that's considered to be indicatory. So you smell coffee, there's coffee around. But if you smell cashmere, you don't know what it is. So why do perfumers use synthetics? I'll just go down with some reasons. So first of all, they offer more options. Obviously, the range of synthetics is humongous, and the range of naturals is very small. Also, they're really cheap compared to a lot of naturals. So I just picked jasmine as sort of, this is like a dichotomy that kind of exemplifies this phenomenon. Synthetic jasmine can range from $5 to $30, and that's created in a lab. But if you want jasmine absolute from Grasse, French, which is the best in the world, $30,000 for a kilo. A kilo is not much. And this is reflected because it's a very small supply, but also it's extremely labor intensive. Like to pick jasmine, all the blossoms has to be picked by hand at dawn before the dew evaporates. Yeah. Another reason people use them is because of their homogeneous chemical content. So if you take a natural rose essence, inside of it, if you put in a spectrometer, there's hundreds of different kinds of molecules. If you take geraniol, it's one molecule. So this is good because, first of all, if there's a famous perfume like Chanel No. 5, they don't want their materials to have too much variation because they want to keep the smell the same. But also, it offers more structure to a perfume. And this is because if you put natural rose on a blotter on your skin, smell it, and then smell it 5 hours later, the smell is fainter, but it's also different because some of the lighter molecules have left, leaving the heavier ones. And so it's not just fainter, but completely different. And so they're a little bit out of control when you use them in a perfume. But geraniol, as it fades, it would smell the same, just fainter. So this is actually related to the primary reason people use them artistically, is because they give a different effect and you can manipulate them. Yeah. So these are like the first, wait, I think I'm going to do this one first. So I talked to a perfumer and she sort of summed this up. I'll just read this. You can use geraniol for price. We can also use this for modernity. Geraniol is a white rose. It's really clear, really citrus. Also, you can't have a bad odor in synthetics, whereas natural rose can disturb with its smell. For modernity, geraniol is better because it really is close to rose. So the first two synthetic material, or the first two perfumes that use synthetic materials, are also the first olfactory abstractions, and this isn't a coincidence. So the first material ever invented was coumarin, which is the smell of the tonka bean, and the second one's vanillin, which is the artificial vanilla that's still used in like every artificial flavoring today. Like, you can eat these and you can also smell them. And so the first two perfumes that use these materials were, one was called Fougère Royale, which means royal fern, and one's called Jicky. And you might actually know Jicky, it's still manufactured. So I'm just gonna talk about the first one for a second. So this is really interesting because this is the first perfume that's coming off of this traditional perfumery soliflor sort of tradition. And the name seems like it's in accordance with that because it's royal fern. But the thing is this name is actually an abstract name because ferns don't actually have a smell. So what the perfumer is doing in this instance is trying to capture an idea and not anything that really exists. So this is sort of like, this is the essential break of what happened. And synthetics help the perfumer do this because you can't take a rose and call it a fern because people know it's a rose. So you have to make a complex composition, and synthetics, which are unrecognizable, really help make something novel that the perfume can name with a concept. And then the second one is Jicky. So it used vanilla and coumarin. And the perfumer used artificial vanilla, even though he had regular vanilla, because he wanted the effect that artificial had. So this guy named Michael Edwards talked about this a little. So he said, vanilla absolute, natural vanilla otherwise, shares this rich balsamic, woody animalic tone with the natural source. Vanillin, the synthetic, does not. It is a simple molecule. Boring in comparison to the real stuff, but it allows to play tricks. As a perfumer, you can overdose it without introducing too much other tonality into your perfume. You can add powder and sweetness without adding a dirty animalic tonality. You can gain another abstraction and change the concept and the context. So basically, this is why people like synthetics, because they're homogeneous. You can add something without adding everything else that a natural would have. Because a rose is many things. It's fresh, it's animalic, it's citrus in a way, it's sweet, but geraniol is one angle of the rose. So I just want to talk about these perfumes right here because you probably know them. Even if you don't think you know them, these are the most famous. These are some of the most famous perfumes in the world. Chanel No. 5, I'll talk about first. So these are sort of all sub-genres of the floral genre that kind of manifest different forms of olfactory abstraction. So the first one is the aldehyde of floral. So an aldehyde, like I said, can be taken naturally, and it exists in a natural smell, but in these, or in Chanel No. 5, they put it in a huge proportion. So there's rose in this perfume, and aldehydes would be in rose, but they sort of amped it up. They added a huge amount of top notes that are aldehydes. And so basically, essentially what they're doing, if you're going to draw an analogy to the visual arts, it would be like if you drew a flower and you color it red. The actual flower isn't a uniform red, but people will still understand that it's a flower. Like the symbol works, but you added your own editorialization of what you thought the flower meant, like the essential information to you. And so it's just like any still life. There's many different kinds of still life, and they all have different style. And then the Damascenones are sort of, it's a rose genre where you take the molecule that comes from the Damascene rose, the Damascenones, and you idealize the rose by extracting that angle. And then the classic floral bouquet is exemplified by Jean Petot's Joy, which was described as the platonic idea of a flower. So I just wanted to, this discussion is starting to become a part of a greater artistic discussion. The New York Times has a perfume critic now. His name is Chandler Burr, and he writes reviews of perfumes. So this one, I just wanted to include a little bit. This is like the way he talks about it. It's really interesting. He says it's abstract but green, and he says it's as enigmatic and compelling as the floating squares of color in Rothko and as free of conscious information. So this perfume is supposed to be green and has vegetal aspects and sweet aspects, but it doesn't go to grass, it doesn't go to flower, it remains free of replication. And that's just a Roscoe, because that was this comparison. So I'll just finish it up by saying that basically what I figured out and what I discovered was that these compositions, they aren't just about making things smell good, and they're not just about intellectualizing. It's this strange convergence of the two. It's an aesthetic study. Like any perfume is an aesthetic study because when you combine two things that already belong to something in search of a new smell, you're searching a new aesthetic quality, and that's basically, you're delving into the realm of art. And you can actually perceive some of the same trends in perfumery and scent as you can in the visual arts and in the philosophy, the postmodern impulse to call attention to the materiality of a statement. Also, you can see there's formalist perfumes, there's expressionist perfumes, and there's also sort of they don't have really photoreal perfumes anymore, because that's sort of not the point, but they have these hyperreal perfumes that are really interesting. And so synthetics basically are an enabler for all of this, because they can provide perfumes with structure, they provide perfumes with power, and they can provide certain angles of abstraction that's interesting for the perfumers to manipulate. And the more unrecognizable a scent, and the more innovative, and the more beautiful, the more it actually really venerates the act of smelling in itself, and the possibilities of smell. And so to me, it seemed that modern perfumes are sort of about smelling. So that's kind of like the end of my talk, but I'd like to mention that almost everything I mentioned in the presentation, all of the smells, I have them over here, in case you're interested. But just thank you to Theo, and thanks Damien, and yeah.